Hey everyone, I'm back. This is Matt Wills with Defining Ethos. So I came across this bill that was recently drafted, and it is a stark contrast to the SAVE Act. Now, this is a Democrat bill that I imagine will sit there until the midterms, and if the left wins big, this is the kind of thing we're going to have to expect. So we're looking at H.R. 4916, the Youth Voting Rights Act. This act is sponsored by a large group in the House, the usual suspects. So you've got Nakima Williams, Sheila McCormick, Jasmine Crockett, Bobby Scott, Shree Tanadar, Rashida Tlaib, as well as many others. This bill has a whole lot of House support behind it. Now, while the SAVE Act focuses on verifying eligibility before someone can cast a vote, the Youth Voting Rights Act takes the opposite approach, expanding access and removing barriers for younger voters. So, what are these barriers, you might ask? Why, all the normal things, of course. Young people are too confused or uninformed to understand the registration process. So, again, they go back to the perceived incompetence of the voter base, as well as marginalized people are marginalized somehow. So I'm going to go through the main three provisions of this bill and how it affects voting, its effect on elections, and its potential for abuse. Now, the first of the main three provisions is the pre registration for minors. Under this bill, each state is required to implement a pre registration process that's open once a person turns 16. This doesn't mean that they would be legal voters, but they would be registered to vote as they'd be added to the voter rolls. But that's not all. A state may, at its option, make the process available to individuals who are under the age of 16. It doesn't give me a minimum age requirement, so maybe we'd end up with 14-year-olds on the voter rolls, maybe 12-year-olds, who knows. Now, here's what supporters of this are going to say. Just because you're on the voter rolls doesn't mean you can legally vote. There are safeguards in place. ID verification from poll workers, audits from election officials. This will simply incentivize and open up people to legally vote when they turn 18 in a convenient way. But I maintain that convenience is often at the expense of security, and this methodology is clearly less secure and forces us to put more trust in administrations. And there's plenty of examples we've seen of poll workers allowing people to vote illegally, and there are many state governments that I don't trust to do any real auditing of their elections. So if minors are added to voter rolls and the oversight simply isn't there, just like anything else, if a system can be abused, people find a way to abuse it. So now we'd be adding a ton of ineligible voters to voter rolls years ahead of time, and the main justification is convenience. Now, the second provision is on campus polling locations. This includes main campuses, branch campuses, and additional locations in the United States. That wording is a little too vague for me, so what could additional locations mean? I have no idea. Each state shall ensure that polling places are made available for each election for federal office on the date of a federal election on each campus of any public college or university, as well as private institution that permits it. So essentially, all public institutions will be required to participate and add polling locations to all their campuses, whereas private institutions have the ability to not participate. However, the states are required to request permission of these private institutions, and if they decline to permit it, they will have to take on alternative measures. These measures include offering free shuttles to nearby polling locations, absentee voting drop boxes on campus, all the way to they would have like a mobile unit that comes to the campus for early voting or election day voting. Then, if we go to Section 8 of this bill, which is titled The Prohibition of Residency Requirements, really the section focuses on one main thing, which is to expand the ability for out of state students to not only vote for the president and vice president, but also to vote for federal office. Now, it makes sense that out of state students can vote for the president and vice president because the member of any state can do that. However, if you expand that to federal office, that means these students can now vote for the House and Senate. Essentially, what that means is an out of state student can now use their campus as their primary residence in order to vote for federal office positions in a state they have no investment in. Then, if we go to section 305, this allows for student IDs to be used as voter identification, so long as that ID contains the minimum identifying information required for any other form of ID. So, the difference between this and the SAVE Act is the SAVE Act is saying ID is not enough. We need straight proof on record for voting purposes. And this bill is saying we shouldn't need hard proof because that creates voting barriers. Instead, we're going to soften the requirements by allowing students who are naturally issued IDs from their schools to use that ID to vote. Now, the third provision is the ability for universities to register voters. The federal government would issue grants in order to hit metrics on voter registration. So let's talk about the grants. The federal government will issue grants to the states that increase the outreach to youth involvement, not just for new adults, but also for youth under the age of 18. Now, the real interesting thing about this section is the provided definition for state. State is defined as the states that make up the United States, DC, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and the Mariana Islands. These places can't even vote. It's illegal for these areas outside the states in DC to vote. So, what's this grant for? The bill states it's for expanding civic engagement. However, if we look at 1B in the grant section, part of receiving the grant is a description of the performance measures used to determine success in carrying out the plan, and in 2A, methods to promote the use of the pre-registration process is part of the state's plan. So now we'd be pre-registering all these ineligible people from all these territories that can't vote to vote. Why? In case they move to the United States at some point and become state citizens? Or is it simply to add people en masse to voter rolls from areas that don't even have the right to vote? So, what we have in this bill is that students would be able to use their campus as their primary residence, which would expand their voting capabilities to include the Senate and House. The campuses would be monetarily incentivized, using tax dollars, of course, to register as many students and youth below the age of 18 as possible. They would be mobilized to have as many people vote during elections as possible, and the students could simply use their student ID as verification to vote. And of course, people above and below the age of 16, as well as people of American territories that currently can't vote, would be added to the voter rolls en masse. And if you take into account that universities are known to guide impressionable youth towards activism through the lens of postmodernism or intersectionality, you end up with energized blue voting blocks that they can funnel into campus polling locations easily and conveniently. But putting youth voting patterns aside, placing youth under 18 and people of ineligible areas on the voter rolls is clearly not secure, and anyone looking at this can see clear motive. So if we're unable to pass the SAVE Act, and the left does win big in the midterms, you may be looking at a voting system that's so convoluted, it would be impossible to trust any outcomes. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Thanks for watching.